Hey guys, thanks for tuning into this video. So the purpose of this video is that we wanted to provide some more information about how people can adapt their gym workouts into a home environment. With the coronavirus and everybody being on lockdown, I'm sure there's a lot of people that don't want to lose the progress that they've made in the gym. And there's going to be a lot of people that are taking advantage of this time to make progress in their own health, their fitness and body composition. A lot of people might be unsure about how they can continue to make that progress or start in the home environment. So hopefully this video will give you guys some really important guidelines and considerations, and then a lot of ideas for what you can perform at home. Before we get into showing you these exercises, we're going to first talk about a couple considerations, and then we're going to talk about some really important guiding principles that we want you guys to learn so that when you go to design your home workouts, you know exactly how it's wired according to what you want to achieve. So before we get going showing these individual exercises, the two considerations that we want to start before we sit down and design our workout, the first is, what are your goals? Now in the context of your home workouts, you want to identify and write down, are there any muscle groups more than others that you want to develop? If there are, you want to write those down first because they're going to have priority when you go to design your workout. The second is, how many times a week are you going to be working out? We'll tell you a lot more about frequency in our guidelines, but you want to identify in your Monday to Sunday, how many days are you going to commit for workouts? The first exercise guideline that we're going to go over is called intensity of effort. Intensity of effort is a term that we use to describe how hard we're working within each given set. When we talk about intensity of effort, it's in relation to absolute failure. So if you're performing a set and you can't perform another repetition, that point is absolute failure. So when we talk about intensity of effort, it's how close are we working up to that point. What we know from the research is that we need to get close to that point to get the benefit of muscle growth. To understand that, we're going to give you a little bit of basic physiology, and we're going to talk about muscle fibers. In all the muscles in our body, we have hundreds of thousands of these muscle fibers, and muscle development is predicated on our body's ability to recruit as many of these muscle fibers as possible. That happens in relation to how much force is required. So if you're performing an exercise and you're lifting something light, your body knows it's lifting something light, and it'll only recruit as many muscle fibers as it needs to lift that object. Because of fatigue, if you keep lifting and as the set gets harder, your body will then recruit more of these muscle fibers to produce the force that's required to continue the set. So we're referring to intensity of effort that gets higher up, closer to that absolute failure. To understand how important that is, we know from the research that it's well established that you need to go close to this point of absolute failure to get the best results for muscle growth. To understand the importance of intensity of effort, we do have some literature to go from. We have a study in 2005 by Gatto and colleagues that took 26 subjects and divided them into two groups. In one of the groups, the exercisers did a set of maximally 10 repetitions, so a very high intensity of effort. So in that group, they could do no more than 10 repetitions. In the other group, they did 5 repetitions, took a 30-second break, and then performed another 5 repetitions. So they were going nowhere near that intensity of effort that the other group was. The results from this study showed that the group that went and did 10 maximal repetitions got 3 times the muscle growth compared to those that did 5, 30-second break, and they did another 5. So the results of the study show how important it is to gradually work up to a higher intensity of effort within each exercise. When you're looking to increase intensity of effort, and again, we recommend doing this on a week-by-week basis rather than a workout-to-workout basis, you have basically 2 options. The first option is you can increase the resistance. So for example, if you're using a resistance band, you can increase the tension. If you're using dumbbells, you can increase the weight that you're using. If you are doing body weight exercises, you don't have that option, increase resistance, but you can change your body position to allow for that. So for example, in a press up, you would start, for example, on your knees where your upper body is bearing less of the load, and then you can progress to going up on your feet, where thereby increasing the amount of resistance that your upper body has to lift. The second option is to increase the number of repetitions that you're doing. So one week you might be performing an exercise and you might have a lot of reps that you can do by the time you finish a set. And the following week, to increase your intensity of effort, you could just add more repetitions to that. So the role of fatigue is important here because as you add more repetitions, the muscle has to continue to work.
When it does that, again, force production will go up and your body will start recruiting more of these muscle fibers as you creep closer and closer to that absolute failure point where you can't perform any more repetitions. The next guideline we're going to talk about is repetitions. How many repetitions should we be performing within each set? So what we know from the literature is that we can get the same level of muscle growth performing high repetitions, so repetitions over 20, as we can performing low repetitions, so below 5. What that means for our home workouts is that we're typically going to be performing higher number of repetitions with body weights or band exercises, and that's perfectly okay. Instead of writing out beforehand the repetition range that you want to hit, focus more on the intensity of effort that you're working on. The chances are if you write out a rep range and you work up to that rep range, you're going to be falling well short of the intensity effort that's needed to get that muscle growth that you're looking for. So our recommendation is still write down the number of repetitions that you're doing, and that way week to week you can see how you can more objectively progress your sets, but focus a lot more on that feeling of how hard it's getting and how close that proximity of failure you're working at each week. The next exercise guideline we're going to talk about is sets. So sets refer to a group of repetitions. Our recommendation, if you're just new to exercise, is that you perform 2 to 3 sets per muscle group. We've got some research in 2010 by James Krieger that performed a meta-analysis pulling together all the available studies up to that date that compared one set versus multiple sets for muscle growth. What he found was there's a 40% increase in muscle growth with individuals that perform 2 to 3 sets versus a single set alone. And this was true regardless of the duration of the training program or how much experience the subjects had. So from that, a good starting point would be 2 to 3 sets. However, if you have more experience with resistance exercise, you can certainly increase the number of sets that you perform per muscle group in a week period. The fourth exercise guideline we're going to talk about is weight, or the amount of resistance you should be using in each exercise. What we know from the literature is that you can gain similar amounts of muscle mass whether you lift light weights or whether you lift heavy. We've got a study in 2010 by Bird and colleagues that took 15 subjects that had resistance training experience, used the machine leg extension, divided their subjects up into 3 groups. They did one group that was called the 90 fail group. So this group lifted 90% of the maximum amount of weight they could lift in that particular exercise for 1 repetition. So if the max weight I could lift in a leg extension is 10 kilos, they would have used 9 kilos to maximum failure. They had a 30 fail group, which did 30% of their maximum to failure. And then they had what's called a 30 work match group that did the same reps and sets as the 90 fail group, but then went nowhere near to failure. What the results showed from this particular study is that the 90 fail group and the 30 fail group got the similar amounts of muscle growth 4 hours after their workout. The group that got the least amount was the 30 work match group. This is another example of how important it is to build up intensity of effort. The 90 fail and the 30 fail group went to failure where they couldn't perform any more repetitions, where the 30 work match group had a lot more repetitions that they could perform after they stopped, and their muscle growth markers were significantly lower than the other 2 groups. In support of that Bird study, we have a meta-analysis in 2014 by Schoenfeld and colleagues. And what they did in their studies, they pulled together all the available research up to that date that compared lighter loads, so equal to or less than 60% of their maximum weight, to heavier loads of equal or more than 65%. And what they were able to show is that even though there was a slight trend towards more muscle growth with heavier weights, it was very similar in terms of what they could achieve using lighter weights. So for our home workouts, that means don't worry so much on the amount of weight that you're using. You can increase the amount of resistance, but it's to use a higher intensity of effort, as we mentioned. So again, focus on climbing that intensity of effort rather than the amount of weight that you're using. The 5th exercise guideline we're going to talk about is rest intervals. Rest intervals are how long we should rest in between sets. It's very common when people exercise to link up multiple exercises in a circuit type fashion. I think most people like the feeling of being tired and fatigued when they exercise, although the literature shows that that can work against you in terms of muscle growth. We have a literature review by Hanselmans in 2014, and what they did is they compared all the studies that showed the long-term impact of using shorter rest intervals, so a minute or less,
compared to longer rest intervals, so 2 minutes or more on muscle growth. And what they were able to show is that there is no benefit to shorter rest intervals for muscle growth, and actually most of the studies showed that longer rest is more beneficial in the context of muscle growth. What most people can do if they don't want to time their rest intervals is they can use a more intuitive approach, or what we call an auto-regulated approach, which just means that you rest as long as you need to. But the take-home message here is don't chase fatigue. It's better to have more rest. The reasoning is if you're tired and you're performing multiple exercises that have an impact on each other, the chances are when you move on to the next exercise, the number of repetitions that you're going to be performing is going to be less, or the amount of weight that you're going to use is going to be less. And that's more important than chasing fatigue. The final exercise guideline we'll talk about is frequency. So frequency refers to how many times in a week you're going to be working out a major muscle group. When we started the video, we talked about a couple important considerations. One of those being how many times in a week are you going to commit to working out. So here we're going to talk about how many times in that week you're going to be working out a major muscle group. A major muscle group being the chest, the shoulders, the back, front of legs, bum muscles. What the literature shows is that working out a major muscle group more than once a week is more beneficial than working it out once a week. In 2016, we have a meta-analysis by Schoenfeld that compared frequencies of 1 to 3 times a week for major muscle groups. And what they were able to show is that working out twice a week is significantly more beneficial for major muscle groups than working it out once a week. In this forest plot, what we have is anything to the right of that middle line favors higher frequencies. Anything to the left favors lower frequencies, and what we can clearly see is there's a more benefit to muscle growth for working a major muscle group more than once a week. So it doesn't mean that if you work out once a week that you won't get any muscle growth. You certainly will get muscle growth, but if you plan on working out more than once a week, think about how you can target those major muscle groups. But again, if you have areas that you want to prioritize more than others, make sure that you are prioritizing those in your subsequent workouts. What we're going to teach you today is how to do different types of workouts using body weight for those people that don't have any equipment, and how to use resistance bands for those people that want to invest in or may already have minimal equipment. Resistance bands are a great tool to use. We use them a lot as personal trainers. They provide a lot of added benefit that cables, dumbbells, kettlebells, other forms of resistance exercise don't offer. Okay, we're going to be starting off by showing you an exercise for the chest, a body weight exercise. The chest has a number of different functions. It brings the shoulder upwards. It also brings the arm across the body, and it turns the shoulders inwards. When we do a press up, we're going to be doing the pushing movement here, and we're going to give you a couple tips on how to perform this correctly. What we're going to be talking about is maintaining what's called a neutral spine. So a neutral spine, if I place this rod across my back, it should contact the back of my head and middle of my back and my tailbone. So that's what we refer to when we talk about a neutral spine. And that's really one of our biggest criteria when we're performing this press up, is going to be to maintain this position. So we're going to show you how to do this. Hand positioning just outside the shoulders. It's more for comfort, but the closer your hands go inward, the more the back of the arms that you're going to get. So somewhere outside the shoulders, again, a little bit more personal preference. I'm going to get into a neutral spine. And here I'm going to squeeze my bum muscles to lock in my spine and back. And I'm going to lower myself down in a nice column, and I'm going to press back up. And what I want to think about doing when I come back up is pressing away from the floor, but maintaining that neutral spine posture. To progress in a bodyweight exercise like a press up, you simply change your body position to allow for more resistance through the upper body. For example, you could start with a kneeling incline press up, then progress to a kneeling floor press up, then up onto the feet. Then you can progress to a deficit press up, whereby the hands are elevated off the floor, increasing the range of movement in the exercise. So these are all options that you can use to progress the exercise, make it more challenging for increasing the intensity of effort. If we look at how effective bodyweight exercises like the press up can be compared to free weight exercises, we have multiple studies that do show an exercise like a bodyweight press up mimics the same muscle activation as a bench press. We have a study by Tillar published in 2019 in Sports Medicine International that compared the press up against the barbell bench press and found that when comparing the two exercises, there was the same muscle activation in the shoulders, chest, and the back of the arms. This shows that the press up can be equally as effective as a bench press for working the same muscle groups. And when progressed using band resistance, you can make similar strength progress in the press up as a bench press. So we'll show you an exercise that you can do for the shoulders, specifically the middle part of the shoulders. These muscle groups are responsible for bringing the shoulder or the arms away from the midline of the body. So you can take a couple soup cans from the kitchen. This exercise here, you're gonna bring your arms from your side, bring it around over your head, back down. And you want a nice continuous tempo, no stopping. You should be able to feel that right in the shoulder. Again, trying to build up the intensity of effort so it starts to feel hard. Don't worry about how many repetitions that you're doing. Try to build it up to the point where it starts to get tough near the end. So now we're gonna choose some exercises to work the front of the legs. So these muscles are responsible for straightening the knee. Squats are a very common exercise that people use for the front of the legs, and these are easily adapted to a home environment. So we're gonna show you how to perform a bilateral squat using 2 legs and then single leg. So next we're gonna do a single leg squat. So here, these can be quite challenging as one leg is doing all the work instead of 2. And what you might want to do if you're relatively new to this is reduce the depth that you're going to be squatting at. So you can use something as simple as a pillow, step over it. Now that will be the target for my back knee. My front leg is still the working leg, so that's the leg I want to focus on. I'm going to bring my back knee down to the pillow and then come back up. To progress the split squat, you can just take the pillow out from the back knee and work the knee all the way down towards the ground, thereby increasing the range of movement. You can progress off that to a deficit split squat, whereby you place the front and back foot at a higher height, increasing the range of movement again and making it more challenging. So these are all different options that you can use to increase the amount of resistance on the working muscles, which we said are one of the 2 ways, the other being increasing the repetitions to increase the intensity of effort and encourage the body to recruit as many muscle fibers as possible. Okay, we're gonna do a body weight exercise for the bum muscles in the back of the legs. These muscles, their primary function is to push the hip forward. We're gonna be using a hip thrust. So for this, I'm gonna be positioned with the back of my shoulders on the sofa, on the edge of the sofa. I want my feet to be positioned underneath my knees. And I can have my arms across the shoulders or resting on the sofa for a little bit of support, okay? So with my hips up, I'm gonna lower them down to the ground, and I'm gonna focus on squeezing my bum muscles to drive my hips upward. So really concentrating on squeezing my bum as I come up. And I want a nice continuous tempo, keep those bum muscles working. At the same time I'm squeezing my bum, I want to think about pushing my heels into the ground. Pushing my heels into the ground will make sure that I'm using my hips and not using my front of the legs. Okay, so here's an exercise that we can do for the back of the arms, the triceps. These muscle groups here are focusing on, they're responsible for straightening out the elbow. So here's a dip exercise that you can do, just taking a coffee table or a low bench. So again, depending on what level you're at, you can start off with your feet flat so that your lower body is bearing some of the weight. You're gonna bend the elbows, drop your bum down to the floor, low as you can get, and then press up. So next exercise we're going to do is going to be for the back of the legs here. We just mentioned when we did the hip thrust that the back of the legs are responsible for for pushing the hip forward. They also have an alternative function when they bend the knee. Okay, so here's an exercise that you can do lying down. You can use a towel, which will slide on the floor if you have hardwood or tile. Next exercise we're going to pick to work the inner legs. So these inner legs, called the adductors, they're responsible for bringing the leg inward towards the midline. For this we can use a rolled up towel, again on a sliding surface. So here's an exercise to work the abdominal muscles. Here we're not actually going to be performing a sit-up. These front muscles are responsible for bending the trunk. But another way that you can condition them is create instability. So here's a leg lowering exercise that we can use. So for the side abdominal muscles, they've got a couple functions. They turn the torso to both sides, and they also side bend. So here's a great exercise that you can do at home. So here's a body weight exercise that we're going to do for the back muscles. The back muscles have a number of different functions. They pull the arm back behind the body. They also bring the arm inward toward the midline of the body. So we're going to do what's called an inverted row, okay? So for this positioning, you want to have your chest underneath the edge of the table. That's going to be your target for your chest. You want a nice tall posture. We want to think about that neutral spine. So my chin, middle of the back, and tailbone like a column, okay? Here I want to be focusing on pulling my shoulder blades together and pulling my arms backward behind the body. For a starting point, the feet are down, so they're actually going to bear some of the load, take pressure off the upper body, and then we're going to show you progression off that, okay? So from here, I'm going to be pulling myself upward, keeping my chin up, get up to touch, and on the way down, I don't want to come to a full rest. I want to come right back up. So for progression, our legs are going to be straight. Now our upper body's lifting more of our weight. Same thing, I'm going to be pulling through my shoulder blades, keeping a nice tall posture with my chin, and I'm just going to try to pull up as high as I can. For the resistance bands that we're going to be using in our exercises, we thought it'd be helpful to show you the variety that we have. It's always useful to get a variety of different levels of resistance with your bands. That'll give you more versatility in your workouts. So here are the ones that we have. We've got the lightest bands in these orange resistance bands. The next level up are these red resistance bands. So these are thinner and less resistance than ones that you would use with pull-up bands. These are the mini bands that are quite popular. These are the rubber bands, and they come usually in different packs where you have a variety of different levels of resistance. Here are fabric bands. These are typically used for doing glute work, and they're slightly heavier, they're more resilient, but slightly heavier in terms of resistance. These are thicker bands, so these are typically used for pull-ups, but they can be great for other exercises as well. The blue ones give us about 25 to 80 pounds of resistance, where the thicker green ones give us between 50 and 120 pounds of resistance. So this is the variety that we use, and you can choose whatever you like, but you'll find that if you have more variety, again, you can choose different exercises and you just have a little bit more versatility in your workouts. While many people don't think about using resistance bands for exercise, they definitely offer some advantages that other forms of resistance like dumbbells, barbells, cables, and machines don't offer. First, resistance bands are a great tool to increase resistance in a range of movement where other forms of resistance would not. In biomechanics, we have something that's called a strength curve, which simply is a way of describing how a movement gets either easier or harder over its range of movement. For example, when you perform a press-up, it's hardest at the bottom of the movement when the muscles are on stretch, and gets easier at the top of the movement when the muscles shorten. That's called an ascending strength curve. In contrast, when you perform a rowing exercise, it's easiest at the bottom of the movement when reaching out, and hardest at the top when pulling in. That's called a descending strength curve. Because bands tighten as you pull them in exercises with an ascending strength curve, like a press-up, they can accommodate the decrease in tension on the muscle by creating tension at the top of the movement, where otherwise, without bands, there would be less. This simply makes the muscle activate more because there's more tension on it. In exercises that have a descending strength curve, like a row, they make the hardest part, the pulling part of the row, even harder. Other advantages of resistance bands are that they're extremely versatile. You can move them around and tie them to almost anything. They're also relatively inexpensive, easy to find, and come in a variety of different forms and levels of resistance. So for press-up progression, we can use a resistance band. So we'll take the band, loop it around the back, and then that way when you push off the ground, you're going to be pressing into the resistance. Here's an exercise for the shoulders. As we talked about before with the shoulders, their primary function is to move the arm away from the midline. So you grab a couple resistance bands of the same resistance, you stand on them, you're gonna bring your palms so they're facing away and pressing overhead, back down outside the shoulders, overhead, and again, continuous tempo, no stopping. So we showed you a exercise using the bands for the shoulders where we did it in a standing position, and we're just going to show you one where you can do it in a seated position. Now the difference between the two is whenever you do something in a seated, kneeling position, there's more stability, so you might not think about it when you're standing. Your brain has to focus on balance as well, so it takes a little attention off the working muscles, and it's generally a little bit more challenging. If you find that standing exercises are a little bit more challenging and you want to regress a little bit, you can absolutely use seated exercises or even kneeling exercise. Here's an exercise for the shoulders that you can use for in a seated position. So here I'm just going to step under the band. I've got a band of the same resistance on both sides. I'm going to bring my hands just outside my shoulders and I'm going to press overhead and then back down. So same as our standing shoulder press, just in a seated posture. So I don't have to worry about balance in this one. Again, my priority should be getting down just outside the shoulders and then pressing up overhead in a continuous tempo to make sure the muscle keeps working. Okay, here's another exercise that you can do for the shoulders. This is again going to be part of the middle shoulders. We did one before using the soup cans going out to the side. Here's how to use it using a resistance band. You're going to step on the band, lifting up the elbows, keeping the elbows higher than the wrists. You should be able to feel that in the middle part of the shoulders. If you want more tension, just move the feet outwards more, tighten up the band. Same thing. So here's another variation that you can use using two resistance bands for the shoulder muscles. Again, for the middle part of the shoulders, that's responsible for bringing the arm away from the midline. So for this one, you're going to step on both. Again, if I want more tension, I'm just going to shorten up the band and I'm going to step with a little bit more tension. And then here, I'm just going to bring my arms out to the side and back down. And I want to make sure I have tension at the bottom part. And I'll go up to shoulder height. So this is another variation with the soup cans. We went overhead, this one just up to about shoulder height. So we're gonna do one here for the back part. We're gonna take our 2 lighter bands and we're gonna anchor them together so we have one. We're gonna put it back on that door handle. And for this one, we're gonna move our arms back behind us. And then forward, and then back, keeping those arms straight. If I need more tension, I'm gonna move backwards. The further I can bring the arms back, the better. I wanna keep the muscle working, so I wanna make sure when my arms are reaching out in front of me that I do have tension on them. So here's an exercise that you can do for the upper back muscles. So you have those muscles in between the shoulder blades. Those are our rowing muscles. They pull the shoulder blades in. Big muscles on the side here also help to bring the arms backward behind us. You can take 2 bands of the same resistance. You can loop them through so that you basically create one long one. You can put this around the door handle. And here we're gonna perform a row movement. So what you wanna focus on here is that squeeze between the shoulder blades. So I'm gonna pull, forget about that I'm pulling with my arms, I'm gonna think about pulling with my shoulder blades together. So here's an exercise that we're gonna do for the chest. Again, we learned before that the chest is one of our big pressing muscles, okay? It pushes forward, brings the hands in or the shoulders in towards the midline. We're gonna take our resistance band again and we've tied it to the other band, so created one long band there. We're gonna put this around the door handle and then we're gonna go on the inside, okay? And just like we would have done press-ups on the floor, I'm gonna move away. The further I move away from the anchor point, the more resistance I'm gonna get, and I'm gonna perform basically a standing press-up. But here, the advantage is I can bring my hands inward. So I'm gonna push forward, bringing the hands inward, back out, big stretch as I come back. Okay. I wanna move myself to the point where when I'm in the stretch position here, that I still feel tension on the band. That way the muscle keeps working, we're at the full range. So here's an exercise that we're gonna do for the back muscles. The back has 2 primary functions. It brings the arm in towards the midline. It also brings the arm back behind the body. We're gonna take 2 lighter bands for this exercise. We're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna tie them together. We're gonna create one long band. And then we're gonna take this and we're gonna attach it to a door handle. So for this exercise here, we're gonna keep our arms perfectly straight and we're gonna pull our arms back behind our body. Stretch up, and again, we wanna make sure that in this stretch position when my arms are out here that we have tension. If we don't, we just step a little further away from the anchor point. Pull back behind the body, keeping those arms perfectly straight. If the arms bend, we're gonna end up overusing our arm muscles. Wanna keep them straight. So here's the other exercise for back. We just did one there where we were pulling the arms back behind the body, keeping the arms straight. Here's the other function of back, where we're gonna take our arms and draw them in towards the midline. We're gonna go back to our door handle. And in this position, we're gonna go bent over and we're gonna pull our elbows in towards our sides. Big stretch on the way out. And then squeezing on the end. So for anybody that's done a pull down in the gym, a cable pull down, this is the same exercise, just done in a different positioning, working the same muscle groups. Again, in the stretch positioning, I wanna have tension. If I don't, I'm gonna move back a little further. And there, when I reach my arms out, the muscle's still working. So here's another exercise for the back, and this is a rowing exercise. So this is gonna work those muscles on the outside of the back as well as in between the shoulder blades. So for this one, you're gonna take a single band, you're gonna step over it, okay? Depending on how much tension you want, you either widen your feet for more tension or you bring it in for less tension. You're gonna be in a bent over position where your torso is pretty much parallel to the floor And here again, those shoulder blade muscles that we used in the other previous back exercise are working again. You're gonna pull those shoulder blade muscles together, squeezing as you come up. Again, if you're losing tension in the stretch position, you just step out a little bit wider. Try to maintain your upper body in the same place as you pull back. Again, forget about the arms. Think about squeezing between your shoulder blades. So here's an exercise for the front of the arms using the bands. So for this, the front of the arms are responsible for bending the elbow up like that. They're also responsible for turning the palms into a palm up position, what we call a supinated position. So we're gonna perform that in a supinated position with the palms facing up. You're gonna step on the band. And again, to create more resistance, all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna step out wider, less, move the feet inwards. With the palm facing up, I'm gonna squeeze the elbows, full stretch at the bottom, squeezing up at the top. If I don't have resistance at the bottom, I'm gonna move my feet out a little bit wider. Now I can feel that the band is tensioning at the bottom of the movement, and I'm gonna focus in on those front arms as I come up. Here's an exercise for the back of the arms, the triceps. So these muscles are responsible for straightening up the elbow. We're gonna use one of the thinner bands for this. We're gonna anchor it around a door handle. We're gonna move away from it, and we're gonna do this one arm at a time. I'm gonna keep my elbow to my side, and I'm gonna straighten my elbow back behind me. Okay, the objective is just to keep your shoulder where it is, bend the elbow, and straighten the elbow. Nice continuous tempo, no stopping. So here's another exercise that we can use with bands for the back of the arms. We did one against the door. Here's another one where we can do one overhead. So for this one, we're gonna step on the band. We're gonna get 2 bands of the same resistance, and we're gonna hold over each side, and we're gonna bring these over our head. So from here, I wanna keep my shoulders where they are, and I wanna straighten my elbows up overhead. Bend and straighten. And again, a continuous tempo, no stopping. So here's an exercise that we're gonna do for the front of the legs, the quadriceps. These muscle groups again are responsible for straightening the knee. So here's a squat, but using band resistance. So for this, what we're gonna do is we're gonna step on, and we're gonna put it over on the top of the neck. And now we can just perform our regular squat, and the band will be tensioning down. So on the way down and up, we have to work against that resistance. Here's a resistance band exercise that you can do for the front of the legs, but you can do it in a single leg fashion here. So for this, you're gonna place it around your neck, and here, ideally you want it the base of the neck. If you have it, putting it on the back of your t-shirt might make it a little bit more comfortable for positioning. The front foot, you're gonna step down on the band. Then you're gonna move your feet into a split stance, 1 foot back, 1 foot forward. The front leg is the working leg. I'm gonna lower my back knee down towards the ground, and I'm gonna push off my front leg. Here, as I come up, I'm pushing into the band, and that's providing a little bit more resistance. And if I want to make it harder, I don't lock the knee out at the top. So I keep a little knee bend at the top, and it keeps more tension on the front of the legs throughout the set. So here we're gonna do a split squat variation using band resistance. So for this one, you're gonna put it again in that same position around the back of the neck. You're gonna step down on, for the front, the working leg, back foot. You're gonna put it on a steady surface here. Now you're gonna dip down as low as you can, and then coming back up And as I come back up, I'm working out against that resistance. I'm gonna think about pushing through the floor in that front leg and no stopping, just trying to keep that front leg working. Back leg, I just want to think about it like a stabilizing leg. I don't want to be pushing off my back leg. I want my front leg to be doing all the work. So here's an exercise that we can use for our bum muscles and back of the legs. As we mentioned before, these muscle groups are responsible for pushing the hip forward. We can use our resistance band again, better with the slightly heavier one. We attach it around the door handle, and we're gonna step both feet into the band. Now this band is gonna be around the hips, okay? We want it around our hip bone. We're gonna walk away, okay? This is a slightly more technical exercise, but it's great for activating and working these muscles. So for this, we want to push our bum to the back of the wall to where it's anchored, and we want to squeeze our bum and push into the band as we go through. Your hips are quite a strong set of muscle groups, so if you need more tension, you just walk forward, push the bum back, squeeze the bum, push the hips forward. Okay, so I'm not actually bending from my back, I'm bending from my hips. So here's an exercise that we're gonna do for the outer leg muscles. So these are the side glute muscles and then the outer leg. They're responsible for bringing the leg away from the midline. For the band, we're gonna anchor it around something sturdy, but ideally around knee height or just below. You're gonna jump in and you're gonna put this around the knee, okay? So I'm gonna be stepping away and pushing into the resistance band, and that'll get these outer leg muscles activating here, okay? This opposite leg helps push, and it ends up being straight in this bottom position. If I need more resistance, I'm just gonna take a little step out. Here's an exercise that we can use for the chest. So the chest, as we mentioned before, it has a pushing function there. When you bring the hands together across the midline, it activates the chest. So we're gonna do an exercise here again using our two lighter bands tied together to create one long band. We're gonna put it back on the door handle. We're gonna have one band in each hand. We're gonna face away, and with our arms they're about straight, you're gonna squeeze inward and then stretch out wide. Now when I'm bringing my arms back, I wanna reach back behind my body and then I wanna squeeze in. So again, I'm not bending and straightening my elbows. I'm just making a big T shape, getting back behind my body. I wanna have tension here. If I don't, I'm gonna move forward a bit. Squeeze in, big reach back. So here's an exercise that we're gonna do for the calf muscles, okay, behind the leg. These guys are responsible for pushing the foot downward like you're pushing on a pedal. So for this one, we're gonna grab a seat. We're gonna use one of the heavier resistance bands. These are best done one leg at a time. So here, I'm gonna take the band, I'm gonna put it around my forefoot, not my toes, and I'm gonna pull tight on the band. Depending on how much tension I put on will determine how much tension is on the calf muscle. I'm gonna push down as if I'm pushing on a pedal, and then let the band pull back into stretch. And again, I want a nice continuous tempo. So we're gonna move on to teach you a couple exercises that you can do using mini bands. These are smaller bands that you can pick up. They usually come in different resistances. A number of different companies make them. They're fairly inexpensive. They usually come in two different types. There's the fabric bands, and then there's the rubber bands. The fabric bands are just a little bit firmer. They're more comfortable. They are slightly more expensive. Where the rubber bands, these are a little bit, they can be lighter in resistance, but also very useful if you can't get a hold of these fabric bands. Here's an exercise that we're gonna do for the outer leg. Again, you can choose either the fabric band or the smaller rubber bands. So for this one, you're gonna put it in between just above both knees. And here we're gonna do side steps, so alternating, okay? So I'm gonna step to each side. Now what I wanna do ideally is I wanna hit the same target. So I might pick out 2 points on my floor that I wanna get to each time, because the tendency is when these muscles start to fatigue, I'm gonna move out shorter and shorter. So I wanna try to get the same distance in between. I also wanna keep these muscles working. So when I step, okay, I don't wanna bring my feet together. I wanna leave a little bit of room in between my legs so that there's tension on those outer muscles every time I step. If I wanna make this harder, all I need to do is take this band and bring it down lower. So if I bring it around my calf, that would be harder than around the knees. And if I bring it around the ankles, that would then be the hardest. So it depends on what level that you're at. So you can use the same resistance band, but place it on different parts of the leg to make it either harder or easier. Here's another exercise that we can do for the outer leg. So instead of using the fabric band, this is more appropriate for the rubber band. So again, this is gonna be placed around both ankles, and I'm gonna use the support of a wall, and this is purely for balance support and to help me maintain my posture. And from here, I'm gonna side kick outwards, okay? So the technique for this one is you wanna try to keep resistance on the outer leg. Once the band goes loose, I lose the tension on the outer leg. So I wanna stay in the range where I still maintain tension, okay? The tendency is gonna be to lean over onto this side, so I wanna use the wall for support to help me maintain an upright posture. So here's an exercise that we're gonna do for the bum muscles. So similar to our body weight hip thrust that we did off the sofa, and we can now use resistance to add a little bit of overload. So for this, we're gonna be sitting down on the ground. For the band positioning, you're gonna anchor it around your foot and then the top of the knee, okay? This side with the band is gonna be the working hip, okay? This side isn't doing anything. I'm gonna go in my hip thrust position with my feet underneath my knee, hands down for balance support. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna bridge up, squeezing my bum and letting this hip do the work and pushing into the resistance as I go up. So here's another exercise that we can do off a floor position using the mini bands to work the outer legs. So for this one, we're gonna bring it around both legs, just around the knees. You're gonna lie back